Gospel of the Lord according to St. Luke, the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who sent me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. He thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please pray for us. Dear Lord, we give you thanks this day for everything that you have given us. Our lives, ourselves, our treasure, the time that we share together. We pray that you would enrich us by the gift of your Spirit and help us to understand that our goal in life is not to accumulate riches, but to be rich towards you. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our redeemer. Grace be unto you and peace, God our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Hi, I'm Stanley Johnson. I have this house. I have 2 nice cars. I've got a swimming pool. And I am a member of the country club. My children go to the best schools. I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. Someone help me. Well, I'm sure you've encountered Stanley before, if you watch television at least. One of the interesting things about advertisements is often the most annoying ads are the ones that they print, that they publish the most on television. That is one of those annoying ads. But the interesting thing about it is that you can assume that they will play the ad over and over again if it is somewhat relevant to where people are. And that one must be, because it is played so much. I'm not sure I got Stanley all the way with everything that he had to say, but you get the point. Stanley Johnson is the picture of today's gospel lesson. And of course, if you listen to the news, you know that he's pictured a lot, all across the country. All you have to do is to pay attention to the gyrations in the stock market to know that. They tell us that something called subprime loans is causing all this problem in the stock market. Well, all that is about is that a lot of banks offered people loans when they really couldn't afford it, because all they had to do was to make a minimum payment now, and then later down the road, it would be time to pay the piper. Well, unfortunately, now is the time for the piper to be paid. I said that. That's pretty good. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Now is the time for the piper to be paid, and so it's causing all kinds of problems in the economy. Because the fact is, some of those people can't afford to pay their loans, and they're going to lose their houses. Well, if you're not in that position, you can simply feel very satisfied that you weren't too greedy with your house purchase so that you can afford your house. If you are in that position, well, that's kind of a picture of this morning's gospel. But don't feel alone. All of us suffer from this problem from time to time. I know I did last week. One of the funny things about the lottery is that I don't buy a ticket unless the prize is over $100 million. I want to be a big millionaire. You know, if you're going to win $10 million with the lottery, it seems like it would be worthwhile to pay $1. I don't bother with it. $100 million is my threshold point. And so last week I noticed that the lottery was above $100 million, and I went in and purchased a ticket. Now the interesting thing is I usually don't pay much attention to the ticket after I purchased it. But when I opened up Thursday morning's paper, I noticed that the numbers in the paper reminded me somewhat of the numbers that were on my ticket. So for a brief and fleeting moment, I was really quite excited. I rushed out to my car, retrieved my ticket, went back in to compare it with the newspaper, and when I did, I noticed that the very first number was the same. Wow, I said, could it be? I was even more excited. And then I compared again. I didn't have a single number. Oh well, I have to work the rest of my life. It's not that big a deal. God calls me to do this anyway. But it's the idea. $100 million is a lot of money. What would I do with it? Well, the Old Testament lesson this morning from the book of Ecclesiastes tells us that you can spend your life accumulating wealth, and certainly Solomon did. If you read what he had in the Bible, you find that even the richest billionaire in America doesn't much compare with Solomon, with all the palaces that he had, his wives, his lands. And what does he tell us in the book of Ecclesiastes? He says, all is vanity, or as we say in the South, it don't amount to a hill of beans. It is nothing. Life as the accumulation of wealth doesn't amount to anything. Now I realize that's a kind of a countercultural position, but Tabor kind of states the situation and to play Fiddler on the Roof when he sings, if I were a rich man, and you remember this song, I'm sure. He says he would build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of the town. People would think he was wise. The rabbis would come to him with problems, would cross their eyes, according to the song. And he would be able to solve those problems. The fact is that when people have money in our culture, well, somehow we think that they are smart. And indeed, Tabor's picture is an illustration of the way that life is. What that picture tells us is that it's going back a very long way. Solomon was exactly in the same position in the world. But Jesus has a message that runs exactly the opposite to the way we think of things in the world. Much like other messages of the gospel, this one is one that not only somewhat confuses us, it might even make us angry. Particularly if you've spent your life accumulating wealth, thinking that it's going to do something for you. The fact is, this parable of the rich man is the kind of parable that just cuts us to the core. We don't quite know what to do with it. Because the rich man is like a lot of people that we see around us, sometimes even ourselves. And what's so horrible about this? How are we supposed to be rich toward God, as Jesus says? How are we supposed to lay up treasures for the kingdom? Well, there's something in this gospel lesson that gives us a clue. And that's what the rich man doesn't do. The rich man doesn't pay any attention to anyone other than himself. Notice the story. He says to himself, I have an abundance of crops. What am I going to do with them? And what's his answer? It isn't give it away to the poor. It's, I'm going to build bigger barns so that I can store my crops. And that's exactly what he does. The problem is that he may feel very self-satisfied for a little while, but ultimately his quest is the quest of vanity. Because what are we supposed to do with the abundance of our resources? We're supposed to use them for God's purposes, not only for our own. And that's where this gospel lesson becomes somewhat difficult. I have to tell you, I had a tremendous experience early in my ministry when I really learned what this was all about. And it wasn't because of anything that I really did. I first moved to Atlanta in 1980 to become pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church. And in 1981, shortly after I arrived there, one of the stalwart and old members of the congregation died. He was a banker. And I did the funeral. I remember doing the funeral. He died very suddenly. And somehow I preached a sermon right after he died, a stewardship sermon about tithing. I don't remember anything about that sermon. About 5 years later, his widow, now in her late 80s, contracted breast cancer. So I got to know her pretty well through her illness. And after she was home from the hospital, I went to visit her. She told me one of the most remarkable stories anyone ever told me in my ministry. She said, you may not remember this, but right after my husband died, you preached a sermon on tithing. I didn't remember it at all. She said, throughout our life together, we never gave much to the church or anything else. She said, but I thought, I could probably do that. I could tithe. And she said, right after your sermon, I started tithing. She said, after a few weeks, I started to grow more confident in handling my affairs. So I went to the bankers who were managing the trust that he left, and I told them, I'm going to manage this from now on. She said, and I continued to give 10% to the church. She said, in the 5 years since he died, my resources have more than doubled. And I've been able to increase my tithe every year. I was truly amazed. What's interesting about that is that as I began to relate to this woman, I began to realize that she had something about her life that was just really strong in a spiritual sense. She was the embodiment, it seems to me, of what St. Paul talks about as a cheerful giver. She simply gave, and she gave out of the abundance of her resources. When I went back to the church to check on the giving list, she was the largest giver in the congregation. No one would have had any idea that she was it. Last year, this woman died. She was 104. And I always thought, as she lived her life, and I continued to hear about her, that probably one reason she was living to be so old had to do with this very gentle spirit of giving that she seemed to embody through the later part of her life. We used to laugh about this in some respects at Newberry College. We said that if you left Newberry in your will, well, that was a guarantee that you were going to live a very long time. And indeed, there were quite a few donors in our donor base who were quite old. But it seems to me there may be something to this. St. Paul tells us that whether we live or whether we die, we are in the Lord. And people who are able to give from the abundance of their resources are people who trust the Lord. And in that trust comes the assurance that God alone provides for us life. It seems to me that simple understanding is really what it means to be rich toward God. Poor Stanley Johnson, if he could only be told that he could simply solve his problems by becoming more rich toward God rather than trying to impress his neighbors, he would be so much better off. The fact is that God has already given us one leg up on that wealth. He has called us to be his own through our baptism. God has brought us into the faith. And we share the gift of that faith Sunday after Sunday as we come to worship. And as we share in the sacrament of Holy Communion, we are drawn together in that faith. That's the power of the gospel. Jesus truly knows what he is talking about here. And he's reflecting a very simple idea that somehow our thick heads just don't accept very well. Our wealth is the wealth of giving. As we share in the ministry of our Lord from one day to the next, understanding that in him comes all of our power, our strength,